I stood at the periphery of the dance area, my fingers clenching a champagne flute as if it were my sole means of composure. The crystalline lights from the Ritz-Carlton ballroom's ceiling reflected off the emerald satin gown I wore, presenting the image of a flawless wife to any observer. However, internally, I was disintegrating. Directly in front of me, my husband, Richard Donovan, was twirling a blonde woman in a tango so alluring it sent a shiver down my spine. The woman was Claire Monroe, the most junior associate at Richard's law firm. Donovan and Healy, just last week, he had described her as merely a promising employee. Now, that promise manifested as her chest pressed against his, her lips brushing his cheek with every rotation. I once cherished his dancing, the assured steps, the firm embrace. It all used to make me feel exceptionally chosen. 12 years ago, I was a final-year architecture student when his gaze captivated me. And now those same eyes, lost in another, were the only thing keeping me grounded. "They make a striking couple," a voice interjected beside me. Evelyn, the wife of Richard's long-standing partner, a woman who always possessed an uncanny ability to strike at the most opportune moment. I turned and offered a faint smile. Claire seems very dedicated to cultivating her professional connections. Evelyn arched an eyebrow, anticipating an outburst. But I denied her that gratification. I simply raised my glass, lightly tapped it against her martini, then turned away as if I had not just witnessed my husband's hand slide down another woman's back. I quietly exited the ballroom and entered the marble-tiled powder room. Observing myself in the mirror, I saw a woman with an elegant chignon, dark red lipstick, and eyes that no longer held a sparkle. She had vanished long ago. I used to have aspirations, to design residences filled with a sense of freedom. Now, I resided in a picture-perfect dwelling where everything appeared immaculate, except for the marriage itself. I opened my handbag. A message blinked on the screen. "Car ready. Rear exit. Lot 3. J. Jason, my closest friend for 2 decades, was the only one privy to the fact I had been orchestrating this moment for 6 months. He always maintained, 'Grace, you don't require a dramatic scene to reclaim your liberty. You merely need the opportune moment to depart.' I took a deep inhalation, adjusted my pearl earrings, and stepped out. The orchestra had transitioned to a more languid melody. Richard and Claire remained on the dance floor, oblivious to the world around them, which was perfect. I navigated through the crowd, positioning myself where Richard could not possibly fail to see me. And then he did. His gaze faltered for a second. Claire turned too, and for an instant, I perceived more than triumph in her eyes. I saw uncertainty. "Grace," Richard stammered, attempting to create distance between them. "Claire and I were just discussing legal strategy, right?" I interjected, my voice soft, very passionate. "Do continue." I calmly placed my champagne flute on a nearby table. Then, from my handbag, I retrieved something small, the platinum wedding band he had given me on our 5th anniversary. There were no parting words, no tears. I laid the ring on the glass tabletop. The sound was strangely subdued, yet sharp, like the initial fissure in a flawless facade. "Keep dancing with her, Richard," I whispered, "because you won't notice when I disappear." I turned and walked away, the music fading in my wake. I did not look back, as there was no need. I knew that by the time Richard comprehended what he had forfeited, I would be somewhere he could never locate me. A gray Lincoln awaited at Lot 3, its engine idling. Jason sat behind the wheel, illuminated by the glow of his phone. As I opened the door, his eyes met mine. No inquiries posed. He just nodded, as if confirming the plan was in motion, and that from this moment onward, I was no longer Grace Donovan, wife of prominent attorney Richard Donovan. "Did you bring the old phone?" Jason asked as I entered. I handed him the iPhone Richard used to monitor my schedule, calls, and even photos, now powered off but with its location services still active. Jason smiled. Perfect. He tossed it into a black bag with a few other devices I had been preparing for weeks. When that bag entered the Hudson River the following morning, any trace of me would vanish with it. I gazed out the window. The city still glittered, still throbbed, still felt cold, as if it were indifferent that a woman had just abandoned a 12-year marriage. But I did not require the city's sympathy. I needed a new beginning that no one could trace. "Are you certain about this?" Jason inquired, turning onto the highway, away from Manhattan. "More than ever," I replied, gripping my bag. Inside, a new identification, an unactivated phone, and a folder Jason had helped me prepare over several months contained the details of my new persona, Nora Whitman. Born in 1985 in Madison, Wisconsin, with a degree in strategic management and a background in operations consulting for mid-sized firms, realistic enough to pass verifications, yet vague enough to avoid scrutiny. When I first broached the idea of disappearing, Jason had remained silent for a considerable time. We had once dated during our sophomore year, but time, distance, and choices had separated us. I married Richard. Jason pursued a career in cybersecurity, remained single, and always asserted that love was a luxury in a world rife with data breaches. But when I expressed my desire to vanish, he uttered just one thing: "If you're going to do it correctly." And he did not just assist me. He taught me how to disappear. We established a Belize bank account under my new name, transferring money in small increments from a personal account Richard never monitored. I sold a portion of my design studio stake through a legal entity Jason created, channeling the proceeds into a Singaporean business account. We engaged an independent financial expert to diversify the assets, all under the name Nora Whitman. We also retained a discreet attorney, an old contact of Jason's from his time with witness protection, to legalize all identification changes, asset transfers, and even the new passport. Medical card, social security, Portland residency papers, they're all in your suitcase, Jason said as we turned into a secluded guest lodge. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, my sister's contact will get you to the airport." "I'm not flying directly to Portland. No, you'll stop in Denver. Change names again. Nora Whitman is just a transitional identity." I nodded. It was all part of the plan. When we parked, Jason handed me a new phone. No GPS, no social applications. Only use this to call me if it's urgent. From now on, you're Nora. There's no turning back. I looked at him for a long duration. Those eyes, unchanged after all these years, held something Richard never did: absolute trust. "Thank you, Jason, for everything." He nodded, silent. I knew assisting me was not merely about protecting someone he once loved. It was his way of redeeming what we had lost years ago. I entered the room, opened my suitcase, and sat by the simple bed. On the wooden table, I placed the Nora Whitman identification beside the only photograph I brought my mother, who used to say, "You can be anyone as long as you choose the right time to begin." I had chosen the right time, and tonight marked the commencement. The following morning, I sat in the quiet room as sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust motes floating like a faint stage curtain in the air. I opened the encrypted laptop Jason had prepared, used only for accessing finances, secured data, and evidence. What I was about to open was a file that had cost me many sleepless nights, a collection of documents gathered during the final 2 months before I disappeared. While Richard still believed I was occupied designing a boutique hotel in Asheville. It all began when I discovered a letter from the bank buried in a pile of unopened mail on the desk at home. Normally, Richard handled all financial paperwork, and I never had a reason to question anything. But this letter, titled Notice of Secondary Mortgage Loan, was addressed to me as a co-owner of the house. I remembered clearly that the $800,000 home in Fulton County had been fully paid off by the 3rd year of our marriage, primarily using the inheritance I received from my grandfather after his passing. And yet, Richard had taken out a $650,000 loan against that very house 6 months prior, without saying a word. I felt as if the floor had just vanished beneath me. I called Jason, nearly in a state of panic. He arrived within an hour, bringing data recovery tools and remote email retrieval software. "I think I can help you find something on Richard's laptop," Jason said as he plugged a USB drive into the silver MacBook Richard always took on business trips. "But, Grace, if you decide to dig deep, you need to be prepared. Not everything you find is going to be something you want to know." I nodded. The truth, even if painful, is preferable to remaining naive. Within 20 minutes, we located files concealed in a folder with simple yet sophisticated encryption. Inside were detailed spreadsheets of investments Richard had secretly made under a shell company, Donovan Strategic Holdings. Not a single entry involved joint assets, and no reports had ever been shared with me. And worse, the money from the mortgage loan had been divided and transferred into 3 private investment accounts in Miami, one of which listed a co-owner, Claire Monroe. "Claire," I whispered. That name cut deep. It was no longer suspicion, no longer a theory. It was solid proof that Richard had not just betrayed me emotionally, but had also financially conspired with another woman behind my back. Jason said nothing, just observed me. I knew he was awaiting a reaction, but I did not cry. I just felt cold, not from the weather, but from being erased from my own life. I began collecting everything: bank statements, emails, a copy of the mortgage agreement, and footage from the security camera at the penthouse Richard rented in Savannah, a place I had never been invited to, but Claire had visited at least 10 times in the past 3 months. There was even a receipt for a sapphire jewelry set worth nearly $20,000 from a boutique jeweler, an exact match to what Claire wore at the firm's end-of-quarter party. The most painful discovery was a hotel reservation receipt from the Four Seasons in Chicago. For the same night, I stayed home hosting a birthday dinner for his mother. I quietly saved every file, secured them with passwords, and uploaded them to a secure cloud system Jason had established. "If you don't log in within 72 hours, Jason stated, all this data will automatically be sent to Richard's law partners, the Georgia State Bar, and a financial investigative journalist I know." I nodded again. No words were necessary. In that moment, I understood Richard had not just planned for a life without me. He had been quietly constructing it for over a year, using my money, my effort, and my trust. If I had not uncovered it, one day he would have walked away from the marriage as the victor, and I would have been left with the shattered remnants of a life wiped clean. But now, everything had changed. I did not need to confront Richard. I just needed to disappear in the correct manner and allow him to destroy himself with his own arrogance and boundless ambition. And when he realized I was no longer there to endure or forgive, he would learn that some losses cannot be repurchased with any contract. 2 days after leaving the suburban safe house, I sat inside a climate-controlled box truck disguised as a medical equipment transport unit. The woman driving, Marcia, was in her 50s. With short hair and a voice like old cigarettes, she did not ask unnecessary questions. Jason had informed me beforehand. She's the one who'll take you somewhere no one will ever find. That place was a cedarwood cabin deep in the Appalachian woods, on private land in North Carolina, with no house number, no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just rustling leaves, cold air, and the scent of burning wood from the fireplace. "Welcome to your starting point," another female voice said as I stepped inside. Her name was Avery Dean, a behavior and body language specialist who once worked to help me shed my old identity, not just by changing my appearance, but by teaching me to live as a completely different person. Grace Donovan is an interior designer with refined taste, a standard Midwest accent, polished style, reserved but polite, Avery stated, her eyes fixed on me. But Nora Whitman, she's someone else more grounded, strong, but not approval-seeking. She leads with logic, not excess emotion. Understand? I nodded, but Avery immediately shook her head. No, don't nod like that. That's Grace's reflex. Nora keeps her eyes forward, her words brief, and speaks only when needed. In the first 3 days, I learned how to walk, speak, and even smile differently. Avery had me stand in front of the mirror for hours, adjusting every micro-expression, from a raised brow to how I turned my body during conversation. I dyed my hair chestnut brown with caramel highlights, a shade Richard once called cheap. I switched to light brown contact lenses, making my eyes colder and more distant. My wedding ring-wearing hands were now painted nude, clean, with no trace left behind. Next is behavior, Avery said as we ate lunch in the simple, cozy kitchen. You need to unlearn Grace's reactions. When someone asks, "Where are you from?" don't hesitate, like you're hiding something. Nora grew up in Milwaukee, studied at Greenfield College, worked in Charlotte and Seattle. The answer should be clear and confident. I spent every evening practicing in front of the mirror, introducing myself, repeating the fabricated memories that Jason and I had created to build Nora's background. Each story had a real location and real people who had lived there. Jason had verified it all through old civil records to ensure credibility. On day 4, a new person arrived, Dr. Renee Salazar, a behavioral psychologist, who would help with the internal transformation. Keeping up appearances is one thing, Renee said during our first session, her voice as soft as a breeze. But if your feelings and responses don't change, every disguise can eventually be stripped away. She asked me dozens of questions. When was the last time I felt truly happy? Why did I keep my mother's photo in my suitcase? Why did I choose the name Nora? I answered truthfully, that my mother always taught me to know when to walk away, that I chose Nora after her biological mother, who left her husband and raised a child alone in a time when no one encouraged it, and that I kept the photo not out of weakness, but to remember where I came from. Renee smiled. Good, keep that. Memory is the foundation of a new identity. By day 6, I had begun to develop Nora's reflexes. I walked with confidence, no longer seeking eye contact for validation. I spoke concisely, no longer asking for permission to speak. I stopped reaching for my left wrist, where a wedding band used to leave a mark, and I no longer softened my voice when expressing an opinion. That night, Avery handed me a file containing a driver's license, an employee badge from a strategic consulting firm in Portland, and the financial records of a bank account under the name Nora Whitman. "Are you ready?" Avery said. "From now on, Grace Donovan is officially gone. You are Nora, and you'll live as her if you truly want to survive." I held the file, and something swelled in my chest, not fear, but relief. 1 month after officially becoming Nora Whitman, I was residing in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland. It was not luxurious or glamorous, but it was quiet enough for me to hear my own voice, the one that had been silenced for years beneath the noise of a performative marriage. Each morning, I brewed my coffee, opened my encrypted laptop, and logged into the secure account Jason had established for me, not to check a bank balance, but to track the progress of another plan, the unraveling of Richard Donovan. I never planned on revenge, but when I discovered he had mortgaged my house, embezzled marital assets, and plotted to erase me from all financial rights, I was left with no choice but to let him destroy himself, with a little assistance from me. Jason was the one who triggered the emergency data package just a week after I left Georgia. The file contained all the evidence I had collected: emails detailing financial deals between Richard and Claire, suspicious fund transfers, and most importantly, a copy of the mortgage agreement forged with my signature. There was also an audio recording of a conversation between Richard and a private banker in Palm Beach, where he bragged about restructuring the company to separate equity from spousal interference. Jason had extracted that from a VoIP call Richard did not know was being recorded. Just a few days later, Jason received word from a friend on the Georgia Ethics Committee. Richard's former partner received the file. Investigators are moving in. That short message told me everything I needed to know. The storm had begun. 3 weeks later, a headline on a local news site flashed across my screen. Attorney Richard Donovan, under investigation for financial fraud related to Donovan Strategic Holdings. I did not feel triumphant. I felt justice. Day by day, the media became involved. Former clients began speaking out, raising questions about questionable investments Richard had handled. The State Bar issued a statement indicating it was reviewing temporary suspensions for attorneys linked to internal complaints. Claire Monroe, the same woman who once spun beneath ballroom lights with Richard, was now appearing silently beside him in a few candid shots. No radiant smile in sight. Rumor had it she had been terminated after Richard's firm officially severed all ties with him. Jason sent me a message with a short video clip from the preliminary hearing. In it, Richard stood in a dark suit, looking more gaunt than usual. He denied all wrongdoing, blaming internal oversights and lack of supervision from the finance team. But I knew better. Richard never did anything he could not control. A month later, the court officially convicted Richard Donovan on 3 counts: misappropriation of client funds, misuse of investment capital, and forgery of legal documents. And the sentence was 5 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 3 if he cooperated with the investigation. There was not a single mention of Grace Donovan in the media. I had been completely erased from his life, exactly as he once wished. But this time, I was the one who walked away, and the one who remained intact. I looked at the screen. In a photo accompanying the article, Richard was stepping out of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, his head down, avoiding the cameras. He was no longer the sharp-eyed man who once commanded every boardroom. He was no longer the man I once loved. I shut the laptop and stepped onto the balcony. The Portland sky on that soft autumn afternoon felt calm and forgiving. The glass in my hand no longer trembled, and my breath no longer came in stutters, because real freedom does not come from running away. It comes when you face the past without letting it control you. A year later, I stood by the window of my 22nd floor apartment in Brooklyn Heights, holding a steaming cup of coffee. From there, I could see the Manhattan skyline in the distance, where glass towers caught the morning sun, as if the city itself were welcoming me, quietly, but with conviction. I am Nora Whitman, 38 years old, an organizational restructuring consultant, working with companies undergoing mergers or leadership changes. The name Grace Donovan is now just an old layer of memory, tucked away in a place no one can reach. I left Portland after 6 quiet months of building a professional resume, industry connections, and a polished portfolio, painstakingly crafted by Jason and Avery. In New York, I did not bring memories. I brought a foundation. I was not here to hide. I was here to claim. My office is in an old brick building on Spring Street, where every redstone has seen victories and failures alike. I do not have a personal assistant. Every contract is an exam. Every project a test. Dunbridge and Line Financial is currently my biggest client, just emerging from chaos after their former CEO was investigated for market manipulation. I was hired to restructure the culture and personnel framework. In other words, they needed someone to salvage their reputation before it vanished completely. At this morning's board meeting, I presented a mid-tier leadership overhaul plan. Not a single name in the room shook me, and no piercing stare made me falter. I was no longer the woman who stood behind her husband, smiling politely when referred to as Richard Donovan's wife. I was Nora, and I spoke to be heard, not to be accepted. The meeting ended with firm nods. The chairwoman, Clarissa Hill, shook my hand, her steely gray eyes looking at me as if she saw her younger self. "You make me feel young again," she said. "We need women like you, not because you're a woman, but because you have steel." I walked out of the building and into the city's tireless rhythm. A year ago, I thought freedom meant leaving without being noticed. But now I knew true freedom is living fully in the open and still being entirely yourself. That evening, I attended an art exhibition by a new friend, Isabel Tran, a Vietnamese-American visual artist with a striking lens. Her black and white photographs captured the city's old corners, where transformation happened quietly but fiercely. I saw myself in every frame, a quiet survivor of harsh transitions. I was admiring a photo titled "First Steps" when a familiar voice came from behind. "I didn't expect to see you here, Nora." I turned and met the eyes of Elliot Marks, interim head of HR at Dunbridge and Lyon. We had worked together months ago on a downsizing initiative, and I assumed he was there to revisit the ripple effects of a choice we once made together. "Are you into art too?" I asked, keeping my tone easy. "Lately, yes," he smiled. "Ever since I learned black and white can reveal the most colorful truths." Basahin. We talked for a while about photography, about work, and then about the rare stillness in a city that never sleeps. He did not ask anything more, no probing into the past. Maybe because he saw in me something I had spent a year reclaiming, a presence that did not require validation from anyone else. Back at the apartment, I received an email from Jason. "Fulton House has been foreclosed. Case closed." I stared at that line for a long time, then quietly deleted it. Not because I did not care, but because I no longer needed to hold on to the things that once held me back. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and finalized a new strategic proposal for a law firm looking to rebrand after a scandal. Ironically, in the very field Richard once dominated, I was now helping redefine the standard. And I did not need to boast about it. My life now has no scars from the past, no aftershocks from a broken marriage, no shadow belonging to anyone but myself. That Friday afternoon, like clockwork, I received a message from the encrypted security system Jason built over a year ago. Safety check confirmed. Code Nightingale. A brief, clean message, but it carried the weight of a year of escape, transformation, and rebirth. I sat in the warm kitchen of my Brooklyn apartment, chamomile tea in hand, the sunset casting gold across the Manhattan Bridge through the large window. That message no longer carried the urgency it once did. Now, it was a quiet reminder I am still here, alive, free, and no longer anyone's possession. I opened my laptop and browsed the financial news sites I still checked every weekend, a habit that had not faded. One headline in the business ethics and law section made me pause. Victoria Blake steps down from Altura Capital amid financial scandal tied to Richard Donovan. I read slowly. Victoria had returned to San Diego 3 months ago after being ousted from the executive board. There were no more images of her at Richard's side at black tie events. No more ambitious speeches about global innovation funds. To the media, she was now just another woman who trusted the wrong man and paid for it with her entire reputation. And Richard. He was serving time in a federal prison in Ohio, spending the next 5 years rethinking moves he once believed were clever. I read an analysis piece suggesting that if he had not tried to move assets so quickly, if he had not forged my signature on that loan contract, maybe things would not have crumbled so fast. But that if was never for people who believed they were smarter than everyone else. And he, the man who once ruled an entire law firm, never saw the one thing he could not control coming me. Catherine Elliott, the woman who once smiled gently beside him in press photos, who once stepped back so he could take the stage, had completely vanished from his world. There was no farewell, no trace, and certainly no control left for him to hold on to. I stood up and pulled a small walnut box from the drawer. Inside, along with a few leftover personal keepsakes, was a handwritten card from my mother. The ink had faded over time, but the words still held, "You can start over, as long as you don't lose yourself." Back when I was Grace, I believed I had to sacrifice pieces of myself to preserve the marriage. I thought silence was a mark of maturity. Now I understand that silence only pulled me further away from who I was, and rebirth does not come from running. It comes from choosing to live honestly with myself, with my memories, and with the future. That evening, Isabel and I attended the opening of a new art space on the Lower East Side. As I stepped in, I caught my reflection in a large pane of glass, Nora Whitman chestnut hair, bright eyes, steady gaze, squared shoulders, a smile that owed no one anything. She was a woman that Richard, even if he passed right by, would never recognize. We raised our glasses to celebrate the new space. Isabel tilted her head and asked softly, "Do you ever think about seeing him again? Just to say, so something." I smiled and shook my head. I don't need to see him. I once left in silence, but that silence was the loudest thing I've ever said. And now, I'm living the part of life he never thought I was capable of. Isabel nodded, her eyes softening, and clinked her glass against mine. Nothing more needed to be said. On the way home, I stopped by the park near my apartment, the one where I usually wrote in my journal every Sunday morning. A breeze brushed over my shoulder, and the last leaves of fall began to scatter over the bench. I opened my old leather notebook and wrote a few lines. Rebirth isn't starting over, it's continuing. Stronger. After everything seemed to end, Catherine Elliott is gone, but from her ashes, a woman named Nora Whitman rose. And this time, she will not step back for anyone. I closed the journal, stood up, and walked away as if I had never been anyone else. Grace's story is proof of a woman's inner strength when she chooses to let go in order to be reborn. She did not seek revenge through loud words or dramatic acts, but through living a new life, brighter and more self-possessed than ever before. In a world where many still choose to endure in silence to protect the image of family, Grace chose to walk away and rebuild herself from the ruins. She did not just escape the shadows of her past. She became a symbol of freedom, resilience, and the right to own her life. What do you think about Grace's choice? Could she have done things differently? Or was this the only way to truly find herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And do not forget to follow the channel for more powerful and emotional family stories.